What's up? Okay, no problem. We have presentations and things to begin with, so. And there's nothing. Are we live? Okay, wonderful. It is 5:02 p.m. I'm going to call the October 19th Quality of Life Committee meeting to order. If I could please get a roll call.
Counselor Chavez.
Here.
Counselor Lee Garcia.
Here.
Counselor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Counselor Villarreal.
Present.
Counselor Cassett.
I am here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Moving on to approval of the agenda, and we do have a change. Loretta, what is that change?
Madam Chair, items D has been pulled.
It's been removed.
It has been removed by the sponsor for further discussion and consideration and to be brought back in the future. And item H.
But we're not there yet. We'll get there. For
Okay.
change,
Unless-
Loretta, what is that? What was that? So item D is not going to be heard tonight. The Counselor Michael Garcia, the sponsor, is pulling this back for further discussion, and it will come to us at a later date. And that is the only change, correct? That's the only thing that's not being heard.
No,
Oh.
that's not the only thing that's not being heard. There are
Okay,
two
great.
other items that are being pulled.
Perfect. We'll get to the consent agenda. And just for those listening, I'm about to read a really long title. This is an ordinance relating to electric bicycles, amending section 12-1-6 of the Uniform Traffic Ordinance UTO to include electric bicycles in the definition of bicycle, amending section 12-1-40 of the UTO to delineate electric bicycles from motor vehicles, amending section 12-1-88 of the UTO to specify that an electric bicycle is not a vehicle, amending section 12-8-1 of the UTO to prohibit anyone under the age of 16 from riding a class 3 electric bicycle, amending section 12-8-10 of the UTO to regulate and establish a speed limit for electric and manually propelled bicycles on city sidewalks, amending section 12-8-15 of the UTO to remove the prohibition for bicycles to ride on a street adjacent to a sidewalk or path when bicycles are required to use the sidewalk or street, creating a new section 12-8-18 of the UTO to make it an offense to enhance the speed capabilities of an electric bicycle, amending section 12-8-23 of the UTO to raise the maximum fine for violation of certain provisions from $25 to $100, and amending SFCC 1987, section 23-5.1 to amend the definition of bicycle to include electric bicycles and to regulate the use of electric bicycles on city roads. So a lot that Councilor Garcia is working on there. Thanks. We appreciate it. But we will be hearing that at another date. So I can, if there are no other changes to the agenda, can I get a motion to approve as amended?
Approve
Second. As amended?
as amended.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? Motion passes. And now on to approval of the consent agenda. And Loretta, can you please tell us what was pulled?
Item H has been pulled by Counselor Villarreal,
And isn't there one more?
and J has been pulled as well by Counselor Villarreal.
So that is item H and J. If there are no other changes, can I get a motion to approve as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain? Moving on. We don't need to do approval of the minutes. We have that on the consent. So moving on to presentations, we are getting an update on the Airport Road Main Street Urban Commercial Corridor progress. We have Elizabeth Camacho from Economic Development and Miguel Acosta here to present. Or maybe, oh, there's Liz. Hi, Liz. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson, members of the committee, staff, and community. Thank you for saving me a seat. I'm here, Miguel Acosta, I'm here to share with you an update about our project, our Main Street project. Liz Camacho for Economic Development is also here, as well as Ria Serna, who works with Main Street and is available to answer any questions you may have about Main Street and their approach and their support here. She's one of our consultants, one of the people in, providing invaluable technical assistance on this project. And I want to apologize up front. I have breathing issues, right? My COPD, so sometimes I have to slow down and catch my breath, like right now. Be with you in a second. So what I'm sharing with you is a presentation that we developed for the second community meeting that we had. I've updated it to include information from that meeting and a previous one, and also updated the dates on upcoming events. Main Street traditionally starts off with a strategic planning session where all the critical actors in the community come together, economic development folks from the cities, business people, residents, et cetera, chambers, and create a plan to move forward. One of the things that we decided to do, and we proposed it and it was approved, was to go through a community building process prior. So everything that we're engaged in right now and over the next few months is still sort of a pre-traditional Main Street process. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One, the area that we're looking at, the south side, the Airport Road corridor, known by many positive and negative acronyms, is an area that has not had the same kind of community engagement for a variety of reasons, right? And community building historically, right? It's an area that has developed sort of checkerboard, right? There's areas like Tierra Contenta, which was part of the city from its inception, has more traditional relationships and home ownership, et cetera, although lots of affordable housing as well. But a large part of the area was county and was part of the annexation of the city some years back. The first time that I worked on this project was 10 years ago, actually, with the support of Councilor Carmichael Dominguez, partnering with Ed Romero. He and I did a community engagement process when they were doing the Healthy Communities overlay for Airport Road and giving it the kind of attention that it needed, although it didn't continue, right? But it was a start. He and I conducted, we worked with about 400 people in what we were calling like either kitchen table or living room conversations, right? Extended conversations with folks to get a sense of what their concerns were, what their aspirations were, a sense of what they felt were the challenges that existed as well as the opportunities. Lots of good information came out of it. It's in a report somewhere in this building, and it's but a lot of the folks are still around, and a lot of folks have been engaged, just like with the teen center, right? They're still engaged and still participating in community conversations. We had some real insights during that whole process. At the same time, Airport Road was being redesigned, right? And it was an opportunity for city planners and folks to understand that a perspective from downtown or from 10,000 feet is different than from walking across the street, right? At one of our family community conversations, the families were expressing lots of concern about the changes to Airport Road, so that they couldn't turn left coming out of the McDonald's where it used to be. And when we reported that to the city folks, before we finished our presentation, folks chuckled, planners, right? And said, well, that's good that they can get there. It's no good for them anyway, right? And when, we went out and finished our presentation and said that basically parents, moms especially, were concerned because that's where they went with their small children during the day from across the street from Country Club Gardens, right? It was the only area that had safe playground space for small toddlers, right? But, the planners then understood that there was a different perspective from the community level. Unfortunately, 10 years later, it's still the only accessible kind of public, right? Safe space for toddlers to play. That's the kind of background, sort of historic background that we were looking at as we approached this proposal to Main Street, our friends at Main Street, and the work that we've been doing over all these years. Salud. This is the agenda from the second meeting, just to give you an idea of how we approach the meetings themselves, right? Prior to this, we had a community meeting over at Zona, at the building we share with the Boys and Girls Club. A couple of you, I think, were there, and it was sort of testing the waters, right? Testing interest, testing commitment levels, et cetera. And without a huge amount of effort, we were able to get about 40 people there, which was for us, a big success. So we went ahead and planned our meetings. We started planning our general community meetings. The very first one that we had, and I'll give you some of the outcomes of that, was organized and facilitated by our youth interns. We had 25 youth interns this summer, and they did an amazing job of canvassing the community, talking to all the businesses up and down Airport Road, with specific attention to like the loncheras, the food trucks, who have been expressing some specific concerns, as well as others, right? They also did outreach to neighborhood associations, community organizations in the area, and just did some eyeball mapping of the community. Then they facilitated the meetings then with a different experience behind them, right? Having talked to businesses, having talked to families, having talked to youth, and having walked the area, they facilitated the meetings with a better understanding and a better grasp of the area physically, right? They were able to, as they say, get their hands dirty. Although most of them are from the area, you'd be surprised. I'm always surprised, right, at things that I don't know about the area where I live, right? Things that surprises, both positive and negative. It's not the kind of thing that we're trained to do, to assess and analyze the spaces around us. But as we do it, then the more we do it, the more surprises that we have. So we've been following a traditional community meeting format for our meetings. We gather people, we do the publicity, the outreach, et cetera. We gather people, we'll do and some introductions. We always have childcare. We always have some snacks. We talk a little bit, we frame the topics for the day, and we've been having 2 themes or 2 topics or focus areas for each meeting. We frame them a little bit. We do some pre-work, right, in terms of the framing, both through internal conversations and conversations with some of our network, so that when we start the meetings, for example, when we have a conversation about community health equity, we have a working definition of what community health equity means, right? So it's a starting point. It's not an end point, it's a starting point for the conversations. Then we break up into focus groups or breakout groups, 2 in English and 2 in Spanish. We've been averaging 55 to 60 people at each meeting. We do 2 groups in English, 2 groups in Spanish, with questions and prompts for them to feedback information to us. Everything is valid. It's brainstorming. We want people to share what comes to their mind. We don't want it to be funneled or channeled or filtered in any way. All the information has been documented. When we come back into the general group, there's report backs, but there's no analysis, right? There's no prioritization. There's no, this doesn't make any sense or whatever. We want everything in there. So we've had 2 meetings so far, and what's going to happen now over the next couple of months is we're going to get volunteers, community volunteers, to look at all that information and for them to start prioritizing the kinds of things that they see as the most important, both in terms of opportunities, challenges, risks, and challenges, right? And so that information we'll have available when we do the traditional strategic visioning and strategic planning that our folks at Main Street will help us facilitate. And that'll be just after the first of the year when we will do that. And obviously, everybody will be invited. One of the things that we've been doing is having sort of general framing conversations, both internally with our networks and at our meetings, where we talk about the function of community. why are we talking about community to begin with, right? Which is different than strategic community planning in the first place, right? So we're not looking at just economic development. We're not looking at facade rebates. We're not looking at, et cetera. We're looking at, so what's the whole point of having a community in the first place, right? Something that's not, something different than just a bunch of houses. What does community mean to you? What does it do for you? What does it protect you from? And these are 7 role or functions of community, and everything we do is bilingual. So you'll see everything in English and in Spanish. These are some of the essential functions of community coming out of the research, but also coming out of people's experiences. If these things are not being provided by community, then we need to do some community development, right? There's gaps, there's things that are not happening. Over the COVID years, the quality of these functions, right, or the lack thereof was very, very apparent, right? Those communities that did better or were already better functioning in these areas did better during the pandemic, right? And those that didn't, that weren't ready, you know, this is sort of part of what you might call resiliency, right? The things that a community, the assets or qualities of a community, of a strong community. The other thing that we're very committed to is community-led development. Right? One of the, in general, it's a good idea, right? In practice, is even more urgent for us on the south side than possibly other areas of the community of the city, because of what I mentioned up front, right? That traditionally we have not had the organization, the capacity, or the engagement to make decisions for ourselves. So pretty much every decision about the south side has been made in this building, in the county building, in some business office somewhere outside of the community primarily, right? And we understand that happened because decisions had to be made and nobody was there to step up possibly. But also a lot of that was just sort of historic marginalization, right? And decisions about who should be in the room to make decisions. So one of the things that we're committed to is making sure that the community is engaged in decision-making as much as possible, as often as possible. And not just decision-making, but leading in design and planning, leading in the transfer and control of resources, right? Because who controls the resources has the power. That the community is a primary beneficiary. So for example, with the teen center, right? We'd really like to see folks from our community in charge of the teen center, local teens, for example, right? Rather than somebody brought in from some other place that knows how to run a teen center, and that's why they put them there. It's not about any other place. It's not a critique of that, but it's just to point out the need to build local capacity, right, and local leadership, locally led implementation, management, and evaluation, right? We need to be able to say when things are working and when things aren't. These are some of our interns this past summer that did the work that I was mentioning to you. They come primarily from the south side, although from other areas as well. They're native. They come from different schools, you know, Native American, they're Hispanic, Mexican, Central American, Anglo. So we had a good mix of students participating in this and a reflection of our community. 4 gatherings that have been planned. The picture here is not from our gatherings, it's from the Midtown work that we were also engaged in. And that's an example of one of the flyers that we created for one of the potentially the first gathering. You know, so the invitation is to come together to help design our futures. We've got 2 meetings done, the July one and the August one. We've got 2 coming up in November and December. The topics that we've covered so far are economic development, community economic development, and health equity. In August, we looked at education and training and recreation and wellness, and I'll go over some of the highlights of that. And now in November, we'll be looking at environmental justice and housing issues. And in December, we'll look at arts and culture as well as food justice. At each of the first 2 meetings, we had things come up that were not part of the planned conversation, and we made space for them. If people felt that something was important And Miguel hadn't decided, that's one of the topics, right? Who's Miguel to decide that? That's what we needed to converse about. I'm assuming that the same thing will happen in November and December. As I mentioned, the July and August conversations are the results of that, the feedback is gonna be given to a group of volunteers, as well as some paid interns, some young people, and they will help get that information ready for our communication that we're gonna do, but also for the strategic planning that we'll do with the Main Street office. These threats to community are things that have been identified over the summer prior to us starting to have the conversation, actually over the spring. And these are things that came out of focus groups that we were having. The threats to community, new market rate housing and displacement of current residents, demographic changes and impacts on our institutions. One of the real concerns, for example, is that places like El Camino Real Academy, right? Where we've put so much effort and focus on dual language, that if the community ends up not being the kind that traditionally pushes for dual language, we may lose that. That's a very real possibility. It's happening now as we speak, there and other places around the district and other places around the country. New market rate housing and impact on existing affordable housing, because affordable housing can be sold, right? It could be sold for market rate, right? There's obviously, depending on how they got it, there's limitations, right? But at a certain point, especially given how the price of housing has gone up here, at a certain point, even with those limitations, it still becomes a viable option. Affordable housing and concentrations of poverty, right? Which we see on the south side. Affordable housing being just a small part of new development. So, you know, that many developers make the argument for their developments by focusing on the 10% or 15% affordable housing. And then if you're against their development, then you must be against affordable housing, right? Land lost to parks, recreation, open space, all these, all these empty spaces on the south side, including some that had already been designated open space, are being lost to development. Lack of amenities. So, if we're losing all that land to development, there's going to be no place to put the things that we need: libraries, clinics, recreation centers, senior centers, etc. And a concern as well as the industrial development just west of us, west of 599. We're involved in an EJ campaign with some asphalt plants over there. The cumulative impacts on our community are horrendous, and we're the most exposed community to COVID as well. And we don't know the science. I was in a meeting earlier with Presbyterian, and they're very concerned about the impacts of long COVID, not just on physical health, right? If you've been exposed and then you got all these pollutants coming into your lungs, and there's already a high incidence of asthma, et cetera, what happens with long COVID? What are the impacts for physical health as well as behavioral? Right? So they're starting to make connections between COVID exposure and behavioral health. Opportunity zones that we haven't heard much about, but there's still something that was seen as a potential threat. And then cultural and physical displacement. The physical displacement we've mentioned a little bit. The cultural displacement, it's about who then has the loudest voices, the most organized voices, and then starts speaking for our community that they just moved into, right? These are some of the concerns that have been identified. So these are the results, some highlights, and these aren't prioritizations. These are just some things that I pulled out from the first meeting, which was about community health equity and community economic development. We asked some questions about assets, and we asked them to also give some ideas about short-term priorities and long-term priorities. In terms of assets, they mentioned a handful of community-based organizations. We don't have many, but we do have maybe 3 or 4 on the south side. Public schools, the buildings themselves, they saw as an asset. The Boys and Girls Club, La Familia is our only sort of local clinic that works with low-income population. Guadalupe Credit Union and West, because of a project that we had going this summer where we were working with 30 future business owners, young entrepreneurs in a money learning lab. Another asset that they mentioned was our arts and culture program, the ukulele folkloristas that we've got going there, that actually one of the members of your community development commission is leading. And of course, they mentioned us and the mutual aid network. Short-term priorities they mentioned was parks. Right? We really only have two, and they're on the extreme edges of the south side. Right? There's the Swan Park and there's Las Acequias Park. And in between, there isn't any. There's parklets, right, that are connected to developments, et cetera. But aside from those two, we really don't have any. And unless you're like within 5 blocks of either one of those, they're not accessible. Right? Safe South Meadows, open space. That was one of the short-term priorities that people identified. Because of our conversations and our work around COVID, health clinics, and because of the lack of health clinics, right? Health clinics was something that they brought up. Community food gardens, co-ops, support for local small businesses, local arts and cultural programming, senior services, and free youth sports and activities. In terms of long-term priorities, an integrated community development plan designed and led by local communities, right? At the second meeting, talking about education and training as well as recreation and wellness, we asked questions a little bit differently. So we asked about assets and opportunities and then risks and challenges. Assets and opportunities, I mentioned school buildings again, because that's one of the things that we do have in most areas of the south side. Paid youth internships they saw as a priority, and we're happy that the city is supporting that our projects with the Santa Fe Public Schools. Project-based learning, which is again something that the city has been supporting. We have Abriendo Puertas en Plaza Comunitaria, which are adult education projects. The trails, the 2 parks, after-school programming, the Boys and Girls Club, school-based services, like those provided like by communities and schools. Summer youth programs, community cultural knowledge, Gerard's House, which has done a lot of work with grief counseling over the last couple of years, and the Southside Library. So those are seen as assets and potential opportunities for community development. The risks and challenges that came out of that meeting. One, and I've talked to a couple of you about this, very little in the way of adult education and training in Spanish, right? Young immigrant moms, Spanish-speaking moms were the most impacted sector of our economy, of the workforce here in Santa Fe. But many of them were in the informal sector. But in terms of the recovery work, there's very, very little, almost nothing in terms of retraining, retooling, or supporting folks from that is the sector. Loss of bilingual education in schools came up as a risk. Access to school buildings, school buildings are an opportunity, but not if we can't use them. They're closed after school and on weekends when they could be available to the community for a variety of things. Funding and bureaucracy are a challenge. Resources not convenient. And that's primarily a conversation about, or a point about, most of the resources are in Tierra Contenta. And north of Airport Road, there's very little available, right? Housing, commercial spaces, there's very little commercial space available. There's no public meeting spaces on the south side. Food justice, pollution, contamination, overexposure to COVID, and little meaningful community input. So those are the challenges that we're seeing. But in each of our meetings and in general, our young people, our families, et cetera, what they have said, the bottom line though is that they're strong and that they're resilient, right? And that they're going to keep showing up and they're going to keep doing the work until we get it done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And if we could please get that presentation emailed to the committee and to Loretta so that we could also get it uploaded into the packet for the public to be able to view, that would be wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open it up to members of the committee. Any questions, comments? At me. Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Acosta, for being here and presenting this to us. It has been something that I have attended. First couple of meetings, I think the third one you attempted was during one of our council meetings, so we weren't able to attend that if it happened. However, I see the importance of the work that you guys are doing and how you are bringing together the community of the south side, city south, whatever we want to designate the area as. But, being attentive to the opportunity that we have, hopefully going forward with collaboration with the city and the community, different boards and to create something that is inclusive of all. And I think that's the biggest target I think we need to not lose sight of is how do we support the community? Because this is where they live. This is where they, yes, they work in other areas, but their quality of life, and that's where we are, quality of life committee. This is where they live. This is where they gather. This is where they come together and shop, and where do they shop? Where do they go play? How are kids safe out there? I think you bring up a very interesting point in regards to public spaces, and not only that, but our schools, because we already have a lot of very nice places that could be utilized if we can be partnered with the public schools. And we obviously have somebody here that works for the public schools. I know, they could definitely, hopefully, if you can bridge those gaps and utilize some of these valuable assets in our community, that it can be beneficial to our kids. And I think that's one of the major points that I'd like to bring about is that it's the youth of our community that we really need to focus on. They are our future leaders. And
Thank you. And I was I don't know if it's one of the items that was pulled, but I was happy to see community schools on your agenda. We have been talking with Councilor Amanda Chavez for a few years, but also now with school board members Kate Noble and Romana Beta, who are the ones that represent our area north and south of Airport Road. The community school, I brought community schools to New Mexico when I was on the APS board. And we did it in partnership with the city and the county, but we did it in partnership with their community development offices, not their community services office. The whole idea was to build healthy, strong communities, not to stop at wraparound services, right? Because we know historically, if you focus on services and not change, so the root cause, the need for services is never going to go away, right? It just becomes a self-fulfilling budget item, right? Every year. So that was the intent, and I can share information and some of the work that we did initially over there in Albuquerque. I know that the conversation here is just getting started. The district is talking about reimagining the district, schools, etc. It's a great opportunity for a city and school district to talk about framing this as a community development opportunity rather than just, the city giving the schools more money for resources and services.
just one last thing, and again, going back to the whole collaboration of the community and getting their input of what they're looking for, what they need, and really hearing them out, because a lot of times we lose sight of that. And I think that's one of the most important things. The other area that I think a focus on for Main Street area is not just how we build it out, but how do we create the services that are needed by the community. And that could mean even transportation services, where are our bus stops, because a lot of times people don't have transportation, and that's just another thing to maybe bring up. But I'll yield the floor. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Counselor Chavez?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Miguel. Thank you for your work. I was really wanting some more information because I saw that as an asset, we talked about school facilities and kind of going back to community schools. But I know that, when you have a school that you're in charge of and the resources are there and you're reaching out to the community, you may not be doing it in the most appropriate way so that the community's truly engaged. And so I was just wondering if those conversations with these community sit downs if that ever is included. Like, yes, we have schools we see it as a facility asset. We know that some of them are community schools. We know that some of them have after school programs. We know some of them have these programmings. are the resources that they're trying to reach out to the community actually touching the community? Because, we talk about when we worked together in the past about messaging and how important that is and how welcoming a community, it has to be very, very intentional, and it almost has to be dictated by the community itself, which is really tricky to do. I had a great team where you guys led me in that discussion. And because I know how effective you are at doing that, are you talking about how we can make those connections with community to utilize those facilities like they want to be utilized? Because, the district does have a lot of resources in doing that. And it kind of goes back to, I had this interesting conversation. I went to this conference about trauma, and someone was like, if only we had facilities that could just catch our community members who are experiencing trauma and need resources. And someone was like, we do have those facilities, schools, because everyone goes through schools and they are kind of this net to catch those that are with greatest need. And it was just such an interesting concept, because I'm like, that's true. Like every generation eventually goes through this net, which is our public schools or just schools in general, including charters and private schools. And so how do we make sure that we are actually having that large impact in our connection with the community in those facilities that catch all?
Yeah, and thank you, Councilor Chavez, for your question. And I've been at this for a long time, and in 3 countries. I actually got to do this kind of work in Australia and also in Mexico, right? And universally, if you can call the world universal, right? It's not so much about the resources that makes the impact, it's the relationships, right? And even the labels, right? Whether it's a community school or not a community school is not as important as whether the leadership and the staff of that school is developing transformational relationships, right? And we're working with a project called Sin Fronteras Education Partnership, funded by and we're doing workshops and conversations with schools and school districts around the state. And that's one of the things that we're trying to emphasize to schools in particular, right? That is not how much money they're putting into resources and how many, children are being given that particular inoculation or whatever, right? But what are your relationships like with the families in the community? And how can you use funding to do dual capacity work? In other words, build the capacity of both the schools and the community to work together.
And there's the educational component that goes with relationships, right? How are community members learning from each other? So not only the educators educating,
Right.
but the community educating the educators to develop the relationships that will have the most impact on students.
And it takes a lot of work. It's not, not to focus on the schools as much, but any sort of institution, right, has sort of momentum, right? It's going in a part, and it takes a lot of work to change sort of your mind maps, right? So if we were able to look at schools, not as schools, but as public buildings, right? Public resources available to that community, where during a certain time of the day, it's a school, another time of day, it's a senior center, during another time of day, it might be a youth center, on weekends, it might be a recreation center, right? It starts a whole different conversation, right?
So interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Any other questions, Councilwoman Villarreal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank Mr. Acosta for his presentation and the work you do in community that's consistent and holding people accountable, holding government accountable, holding community members accountable for the work that they're doing. And I think with your presentation, there was a lot of rich information from the community members, not just, I think the piece I liked the best is that there was lived experiences in there. So it was not just about, well, this is what we want. It's like, this is what we experience and this is what we'd like to change. So I really appreciate that. And just want to thank you for the community-centered efforts you do on the daily. And I guess I'm just really interested, like the next iterations and where this is going. And then is there some kind of timeline that we have to meet, or is this fluid, or can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Villarreal, for your question and your comment. And I have to say, just walking in here today was like coming home. All the friendly faces and the hugs and everything. I don't get this at many institutions here today. Maybe when the full council is here, I don't get it either, but it's strange to be out in public again, right? But in terms of where we're going with this, so these two next meetings, and then 1 or 2 meetings with that'll be the strategic planning, right? In terms of and I forgot to mention this earlier, there are some requirements aside from just meeting and having conversations. We have to come up with a project, a priority, right? Like a physical kind of thing that we can then focus our energies and our work around. Could be a community resiliency hub, could be some kind of mercado, something, right? That we can sort of point to and say, we're going to build this. And hopefully it doesn't take 15 years like the teen center. The other thing is that there has to be some kind of organized merchants association out of this. We've been in conversation with the chamber. We've been in conversation with the Hispanic chamber, both of them. And they're helping push the conversation along, right? And they understand hopefully that we need a focused airport road conversation, right? That it can't just be the chamber doing this. It can't just be the Hispanic chamber doing this. There has to be a focused conversation about the particular issues, challenges, and opportunities along Airport Road. So we've been working on that as well, and that's also one of the deliverables. And then a plan, right? Besides the focused project and the what do you call them, the merchants association, a plan, like a 3-year plan, 5-year plan for moving forward. At that, with resources and funding from a variety of places, right? To help us, and hopefully there'll be some congruency in the planning, right? With the school district, maybe the county, maybe other institutions, Presbyterian and St. Christus, so we can have various commitments of support and funds, as well as for the projects, as well as the continuing support of capacity building on the south side.
Thank you for that. I was trying to remember the initial funding source came from, was it state Main Street funding? Or was it a combination of funds that for this initial phase?
Oh, we have that was committed by economic development for translation, for childcare, etc. And for when we do those strategic planning sessions, specifically, the rest of this has been our time, our volunteers, our youth interns that, they were paid by PED, our families that volunteer their time, folks from the businesses and the schools that show up, neighborhood association reps, so this is pretty much 99% volunteer up until now.
Right. And maybe Rich could tell us a little bit more about as they move forward, because 10,000 doesn't, you can make it go a long way, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not sufficient to keep a community driven process like going and making sure that you have childcare and food and all that. So I'm just curious if there's other ways, like how you all were envisioning. I know you did the startup amount, but was there another path forward you were thinking?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm very proud of the work that Miguel has done because he did it on his own. Usually these Main Street urban corridors are done by a municipality and they go through the process, and he and his team did this themselves. So it's a very proud moment, I think, for our city and for Miguel and his work. The investment I see further along in the pathway for this area is beyond just that initial investment, but he said something on one of his slides. He talked about community-led development. And so we see more of our investment there financially and resources from the team. So as he gets further into his plan, so helping him find funding, whether we match funds, et cetera, building that plan. Additionally, building the associations, We want neighborhood associations there. So helping him with outreach, promotion, et cetera. We also look at some of the work that he's going to do that will tie into some of the economic development we're doing. Like with El Lucero Crossing, we want to put a food depot there. We want to put some workforce development there, and we want to put some workforce housing there. So we will work with his Main Street group. Additionally, we are working on public Wi-Fi in the neighborhood. So we look to see him help us with public Wi-Fi, not just in the highly vulnerable areas, but how do we affect it for business? How do we get the word out that public Wi-Fi is coming or commercial Wi-Fi is coming? So there are a lot of initiatives that we will cross over with him, but it's community-led first, and then it sort of ties into what we do and see as an economic development move. So.
Great.
Mm.
That's great to hear. I guess I just assumed because you said Main Street, there was actually funding coming from the state. Although this looks very different from their processes that they've done in other parts of the state. So were you going to add something?
Well, their funding supports our technical assistants, right? The consultants who have been great at answering questions and questions that they don't normally address, right? Because this whole process until we get to the strategic planning is something that they don't normally do. But I do need to say that Mr. Brown and Liz have been great in terms of being able to bounce ideas. Rich and I have been in frequent conversations, thinking through, brainstorming, checking on our families and our health and our operations and whatever. So it hasn't been, we haven't been denied any funding or barred from any kind of progress. It's been a mutual understanding that the investment will come, but the investment will come when it's appropriate, right? And we've been able to manage this with other supports pulling out of other parts of our budget. So we have sort of a vision, right? It changes every day, but we do have a vision for when specific investments might make the most sense, especially given some of the resources that are coming down from the federal government, right? But also sort of the local prioritizations here at the state level and the city as well.
Great. Yes.
And Councilor Villarreal, if I could ask Miguel to talk about his concept around work-based learning that we're working with the public schools on, if he could talk about that, because it's very unique because no one else really came to the table with the idea. And I think it's a really powerful one. And as you look at his community-led development, it's a perfect example of what community-led development is all about. So Miguel, if you could sort of talk a little about your concept around work-based learning, which
and it's not like everything else, none of this is me. This is all sort of generated knowledge from throughout the community, right? So we all take credit for it. The idea has been developed in partnership with Future Focused Education, right? And it's based on enabling work that was done at the PED with the legislature. So when they developed what they're calling the capstone framework, right? And work-based learning, it created an opportunity to work with young people, high school age young people, to earn credits towards graduation by doing work-based experiences with an educational component, obviously, right? And having the projects cover, sort of core learning areas and core subjects, et cetera. But basically, it's a demonstration, right? It's a way of being able to demonstrate competencies through experience and through work rather than through tests or homework, right? We piloted it. They've been doing it in Albuquerque for a couple of years already through the leadership schools, like the Health Leadership High School, Technology Leadership High School, ACE Leadership High School, and the new one is the one that focuses on entrepreneurial. I'm spacing it right now. But anyway, here we piloted it this last year. We had several students from Capitol High School in the spring that the city helped fund their paid internships. They worked with us. They helped get everything ready for the summer work that we did, both in terms of Main Street as well as our summer leadership programs. And all 5 of them were in danger of not graduating. 4 of them, ultimately, all 4 were in danger of not graduating, and they all graduated. They all graduated successfully. The pilot worked. And this summer, we engaged 25 young people through the PED's funding, right? To do, they just did amazing work all summer related to Main Street, to climate justice work, to community. We've been working with with the MPO They did some community mapping, just all kinds of amazing things that they've been able to do. So now we're at the point, and this is going through committees here at the district, right? I mean, at the city, now we're at the point where the school district has adopted it now as a formal program. And there'll be two projects that will develop out of this. One will be work-based learning opportunities for students already enrolled in Santa Fe Public Schools. And the other one, the one that we'll be leading, will be for students that we re-engage. So, and it will be universally accessible, so it can be in English and Spanish, whatever, right? In our program, students won't have that barrier. So we're gonna take about 25 students that will be re-enrolled in the public schools through Desert Sage Academy, I think is where they're gonna be placed. That's gonna be the credit granting institution. But we'll be working with them in partnership with the city and others on community-based learning projects. Really exciting. These are 25 young people that are gonna be on the streets doing the kind of work that we want them to do, so that eventually they're like sitting next to you, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's exciting. I think that's having different options for students that feel like they're pushed out or whatever situation they're in, that to be able to have them more engaged and more connected to the community as well. Thank you so much, Miguel, for everything you do and for your community centered efforts. And we look forward to hearing more, and also understanding where we can plug in and support. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councilwoman. Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Miguel. Just want to thank you and your team for the tremendous passion and commitment that you bring to ensure that the community voice is heard. As we've worked together for
Decades.
seems like forever.
It's the youth forum.
But and that has always been at the core of your work. So thank you for continuing that commitment to community. It's evident that the voice is being represented, and thank you for coalescing the voice. One thing I think that is even more unique with the engagement you're doing is ensuring that the youth voice is being engaged, and not only engaged, they're leading. They're not tokens. They're not part of the process to say, check the box. We've had somebody under 20 in the room. They're actually helping to lead, which is a model that we should consistently have in any type of engagement process. So thank you for that. It's critical. They own the process. And as you know, when youth are involved, they bring so many voices to the table. And it's not only young folks. They bring grandmas, grandpas, uncles, aunties, tios, cousins, whoever it is, to the table that wouldn't have been there before. So just want to thank you.
Thank you.
Other than that, no questions. Just keep up the great work. Know that you got a team behind you, willing to support you. We've got lots of interest. If there's anything that we can do to further support, please let us know.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Council.
Councilwoman Villarreal said $10,000 is a shoestring budget, and I know you've done you've moved some mountains off of zero budget, but soon will be the hard task. And let us know if we need to work with Mr. Browning, how much resources we ultimately need to get to.
Our young people also designed that logo. The circle, the Southside Pride, and different things. There was a couple that looked a little bit more gangster, and we figured we'll just put those to the side for later, right? But that's so that's their design as well. Right. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Miguel, I do have just a couple of quick comments and questions. Want to come back? Don't leave. I go last. So my colleagues have all said, thank you so much for the work. And I completely agree. And the unique, it shouldn't be a unique approach, but what keeps coming to mind is that assets-based approach. And I mean, it really came when you were discussing the work-based learning program and really looking that some students don't do well on tests, and it doesn't mean that they don't have the knowledge, and it doesn't mean that they don't have the skills, and just all of these different ways that that you and your team and the community really are finding to build assets and recognize those assets. I really appreciate. One thing that I think is important, there's this conversation around decision-making and really making sure that voices are heard. And Rich had already mentioned, some of the economic development work that is happening. But to your point, how we really build the community is important. And I'm hoping that with some of the work that we're doing with the general plan amendment and the upcoming planning, that there is, if there's not, I'm hoping these connections to really plug in, because there's been a lot of talk about, kind of this big macro, let's look at the city, from bird's eye view, but then also these corridors and neighborhoods and how are we doing planning there? So has that connection already been established? Has it been discussed of really that you're already building this opportunity and information that really should be plugged in when we start doing the community engagement with the general plan?
It hasn't formally yet, but there is outreach already to make sure that we, aside from, the big bird's eye view work, that there's also sort of the community-based, neighborhood-based, street level work as well, for sure, definitely.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And I also think it'll be really interesting for us to hear as we're developed, as the land use team and the contractor, about the community engagement pieces that have worked for the work you've done on the south side, because as you mentioned before, there's already a lot of barriers. There is historical reasons, some not too far off in history, recent historical reasons why this community may not be willing to come to the table, and how that trust is built is really important and really crucial. So Rich, I guess this is to you of really making sure that we are able to work with the groups that have built the camaraderie and trust in this community, and how we think about that in other parts of the city where that key component is going to be relevant. I mean, we've discussed it at Midtown and the surrounding neighborhoods, but I think it'd be helpful for you to share that.
Comment. One of the things, one of the ways that we talk about this work is the civic infrastructure, right? Building and developing the civic infrastructure. And I think this long range, master plan or major planning effort is a great opportunity to do that kind of work. I'm born and raised Chicago, and growing up in Chicago, all of us had to study the Chicago plan, the Burnham plan, right? It was part of the curriculum, right? And it wasn't so much that we were all going to become planners, right? But it was to understand civics, right? And civic engagement and how decisions get made, right? And why does your city look the way it does, right? Why are all the streets in a perfect Cartesian graph, where everywhere else, you keep, going in circles, right? Why does everybody have a park, right? So this is I think a great opportunity to invest in civic education. Another place where we can partner with the schools and with other entities, right? So that as this process builds out, we can be having these conversations in schools at all levels, right? We can be having these conversations with families and parents and neighborhood associations, where we can practice some things that maybe are not policy yet, but we can sort of play with, like say, participatory budgeting, right? Participatory planning, right? Local decision-making around services, around, X, Y, and Z. So, it's a space, like a planning space, right? Where we could play with some ideas. They don't have to be policy yet. They don't have to be practice yet, but we can play there in a way that's non-threatening to establish sort of systems and structures and powers, right? And see how they work. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity.
Thank you. Because I agree. That's really it. It's how do we build this bridge? How do we rebuild the bridge and utilize these skills? So, and tools that we have to really re-engage all parts of our city.
Madam Chair, could I add something to your question and comments? So I want to also let you know that the Planning and Land Use Department does have budget set aside in this fiscal year, and probably start in the new year, on neighborhood planning. And so it's an offshoot of the general plan. And Mr. Acosta will get involved, will be a part of the study that we build the general plan. But as we branch out, that will be part of what the work that we'll be doing, almost short to long term planning. And to his earlier point about it's not just the resources, the relationships, that's where I think this neighborhood planning is going to come into play. So we're going to build that portfolio of relationships that we know going forward. How do we look at the future of the city? How do we look at the future of the neighborhoods? So that is something that planning and land use will be working on in the new year. But
Yeah.
right now, just going to get the general plan off the ground.
Absolutely. And I said it at budget hearings, and I'll say it again, that I think that where those dollars are allocated is crucial, and that we are really paying attention to parts of the city that have not had the focus and attention as other parts have in the past, as well as parts of the city where growth is happening, because that is the time when you want to do the planning before the buildings are built and before, things are allocated and set in stone. And the South Side, that's, districts 3 and 4 is where a lot of that is both of those pieces are true, that there historically has not been as much focus, and where there's a lot of decisions to be made still. So just putting that back on the record.
If I could just add one more thing, language justice. We need much more of the budget committed to translation, to documents, to interpretation for meetings, etc., historical records. Otherwise, it's not really equitable access. And we've shown up at too many meetings, even after institutions have made commitments to language access. And they'll point at me, oh, Miguel's here, he can translate. It's like, no, that's not the way it works, right? So I've refused.
Yeah.
So really, that really needs to be a huge part of the thinking from the beginning, right? Because a lot of this work, like you're saying, getting people to the table, a lot of this work has to be conceptualized differently, not just translated, right? So we have to conceptualize on the South Side specifically, where we have the largest Spanish-speaking concentration, Native American concentration, African-American concentration. If you go into the back corners of some of the mobile home parks, we probably have the biggest hippie concentration too in Santa Fe. Each one of those deserves conceptualization of how this city develops in language and approaches that are appropriate for them, rather than just doing our English version and then translating it, right? Because a lot is lost in translation.
Absolutely. Well, fun teaser. The language accessibility study results and information will be coming to the quality of life meeting in the next, we'll find out tomorrow. We'll be doing some planning, but in the next couple months. So, that'll be a really great opportunity for the city to dive in and look at, we know that we need to improve. And so really drilling down on what those opportunities are, and gives the governing body an opportunity to allocate funding and resources towards that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much. Really appreciate having you here. Thank you so much for your work.
So much fun. Thank
And
you.
we look forward to you said there was a report somewhere in this building. I'm going to guess it's actually at Market. Can we get that report?
That's the one from 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Not a new report yet.
Not
Okay.
a new report.
Okay.
That's the one from
Great,
10
great.
years ago when we were doing the Healthy Communities overlay work.
I see. Okay.
And
Oh,
I've
yeah.
asked people and they said, what's there at City Hall somewhere?
Okay.
Right.
We'll find it. But we look forward to this report, Wyndon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, let us move along to the items pulled on the consent agenda. So item H, this is consideration of a resolution creating a 1-year pilot program to encourage and incentivize employers to pay for employee parking in City of Santa Fe parking facilities at Sandoval Street, the Santa Fe Community Convention Center, and the Rail Yard. It is being sponsored by Councilor Chavez and co-sponsored by Councilor Lindell, Councilor Lee Garcia, and Councilor Cassett, myself. And we have Regina Wheeler here to present. And this was pulled by Councilwoman Villarreal. Councilwoman, did you want a small presentation from Director Wheeler, or did you want to just jump in?
I'll just jump in for interest of time. Just want to thank the sponsors for this, co-sponsors for this idea. And I think this has been idea that we've thought about in the past, that really was trying to encourage people, well, for one, to park in our parking garages, but also to incentivize it based on the income levels. And, you know, when we first started this, when I was first on council, we were trying to work on issues of getting the farmers. I was telling Councilor, who's over there, Chevis, about how we were trying to get farmers to be able to park free on Saturday. It was such a hard thing to do. Didn't work well. We got pushback from staff. We tried it. I still would like to pursue that, but I just put that as a bookmark because it was really important to be able to have farmers be able to park at the rail yard to be able to participate in the farmers market. That being said, then we kind of moved on to this parking option to be able to have the lower parking, monthly parking option for folks that made $15 or less. And I think what was hard for me about that is that there were very few workers that heard about it. And so employers did not tell their employees about that option. So then it appeared that people didn't think it was a great resource, that a good pilot or a good try to get people to park there. So what I'm wanting to know is how we plan to promote the program so that it's equitably available for truly low wage workers and that their employers are prioritizing this so that they can know that this option is available.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So I think that the way we're going about this is really through the business owner, and I think that's going to make the difference. So we've already partnered, so the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Commerce, and Rail Yard are going to be part of the process and messaging, but also serving businesses on the impact. So it's going to be a long-term conversation throughout the pilot, because I like that you mentioned the farmers market and parking with that, but I'm hoping to receive more than anything. Yes, we want to provide parking for the employees, especially the employees that often come from the south side of town and don't have the luxury a lot of times of getting to work any other way. So that is the purpose that, you know, we're trying to fulfill here. But the other component is really getting an idea of parking in general downtown because of the issues that we run into. So the data component of this resolution is really important, and just figuring out when we do have a program that may increase parking, how does that impact downtown? Is that something that we could look at in a larger way at a later time if we're more strategic about it? So both business owner involvement, some of those that work closely with business owners and their involvement, and that monitoring of data are really important here, and I think is going to keep the conversation going throughout the pilot. I don't know, Regina, if you have anything to add, Director Wheeler. Thank you.
So from what I heard about the promotion of this program or pilot program, the Hispano Chamber will get the Chamber of Commerce involved in the Rail Yard Corp. And just, I think the Rail Yard Corp, they are tied into their businesses by necessity. However, Hispano and the Chamber of Commerce don't have the area that we're talking about. They don't necessarily have membership. So I'm wondering if the city is planning on promoting this in some way so that all businesses that are not affiliated with these three will know about the program.
And I'm not sure about that. I just know that when speaking with the Chamber of Commerce specifically, who kind of shared what they can utilize, is they said that they have an email list of those within the parameters defined by the resolution, and that they were that they could blast any type of communication or surveying out that we may have.
Okay. I think just we need to think beyond them. There's a limited number of membership and they're not necessarily all downtown. So I just want to make sure we cover our bases, because there's a lot of other small businesses that would probably benefit from this, and their employees that aren't making that much money and would need a affordable parking option.
I think that's a great idea. Maybe Director Wheeler and I can work with the city clerk's office to get some communication out on that, collaborate with them.
Great. Thank you. The other piece was the eligible perimeter. Can you remind us what area this would cover?
Chair, thank you. Councilor Villarreal, I believe it's within the Paseo de Peralta circle.
Paseo de Peralta Circle, which is a big area. And I guess the other thing is, I think there will be a lot of interest if people do know about it. So we are capping this at 150 permits. Is that what I read?
That's correct. We actually don't even have that many spaces available in the garages. So that's about 50 over what we calculate are available. So we thought we should some amount that we could manage and gather data for the future.
Great. And so you said 50 over what spaces we have. So how did you calculate it? It's based on already purchased
That's correct.
permits. Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how this evolves. I think it's a good pilot to try out and see what that could look like into the future. And we realize that there is revenue that comes from our parking, and to try to find a balance. And so I understand staff's kind of maybe conundrum with it. Is there anything
It's
you
more than one FTE of revenue loss. And that's why I wasn't really jumping in for a bunch of communication outreach either. There isn't any budget for that.
Okay. So you're saying with the revenue loss, that does affect employee numbers?
In the fiscal year 23 budget, it's already established, so it doesn't, but in fiscal year 24, with our decreased revenue, it's more than an FTE's worth of revenue that's lost by the program.
Okay.
$4,000 is the minimum we expect. That only counts as if we had sold those spaces permits, but not if we had just gotten revenue from those spaces of people just parking, because we make like 3 times as much that way.
What was the revenue loss, did you say?
I think it's the FIR. I think it's like 54,000.
Can I just add something? And Regina, correct me if I'm wrong. And I think this conversation was really hard when we were discussing it, because it's like potential loss based on if passes would have been purchased full price. So that's why we really wanted the data with this, is because a lot of really defining some of the loss that would come would be if certain things occurred a certain way. So the data is really going to give us information on what a loss would actually be, which is something we could work with more accurately, I believe.
We're actually sold out for full price permits in the Sandoval garage right now, and there's a waiting list. And there has been a waiting list on the rail yard and the convention center as well. So, I mean, there also is a lot of businesses that buy full price permits now, so they'll definitely switch. So I think there's not, I think you're right. We'll definitely get better data after the pilot.
All right. Thank you. I think the revenue loss at potentially 77,000, but we'd have to see how it unfolds. I think those are all my questions. Thank you all for your efforts. I think it's important to try out and see how it works. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? And if not, I do see an amendment on here, so I want to make sure that we don't miss that before. But are there any other questions or comments prior to getting to that amendment? And if not, Councilor Chavez, would you like to move your amendment or?
Yes. So we, just to help everyone understand why there's amendment, we left out the very important portion of the resolution, which is the reduction in the purchase price for a pass, which is actually reduced from 35 to 25. And so we are inserting that on line 12 of page 3, the 25 at a rate of $25 per pass per month. And so I'd like to move that amendment.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion for the amendment? And if not, can I please get a roll call?
Councilor Chavez,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Marco Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Casser.
Yes.
Motion has passed.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments on this bill? And if not, is there a motion?
Approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and can I please get another roll call?
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal.
Yes.
Counselor Chavez,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And moving on to item J, this is consideration of a resolution establishing City of Santa Fe's priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 56th Legislature, State of New Mexico, first session 2023. And Director Wheeler is here to present again. Councilman Villarreal, did presentation or just jump to questions?
I don't know if staff had any presentation.
I don't.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. These are always fun every year to do. And there's a lot of great stuff in here. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of areas that we've wanted to highlight through the years with this prioritization for the legislature coming up. And what I was wanting us to talk about today is just making sure we're prioritizing I'm trying to get there, our amounts and projects that for the capital outlay for each of our districts. I was surprised to see this on for District 1, the capital outlay project that was listed. Usually we have conversations about this and any ideas that are really have been on our list for a while, things that are of utmost importance because there's a safety issue. I know last year we had put in, or at least the request for District 1 was related to Harrison Road. I think the amount was it 265,000? I think we got that full amount. It hasn't been executed yet because we're still working on the project. And I also wonder if we have enough still. I know we've gotten multiple tranches of funding through the legislature for that project. So that was on my mind. Did we finish? Did we get enough funding for the Harrison Road project for sidewalks and lighting? Although, I think a lot of us think pickleball is a great sport. I think it's an amenity that we want to continue to have in our city. I'm concerned that for District 1, what was listed is that there's some other things that we might want to consider that have some safety issues. So I'm not ready to approve this, at least for my district, what's listed for us as the capital outlay, and was just wanting to, I don't have specifics of ideas that could replace it at the moment. I still want us to look at that. One is Harrison Road, making sure that we're fully funded for that as we get the funding sources. And then just thinking about anything we need for the rail yard park. I don't know if there's anything in particular. I'm just throwing that out. And then due to our changes for our district, the redistricting, I don't know if this falls in my district yet, but there is the Santa Fe River Bridge that is not functioning and it's a safety issue. And I don't know if that's ends up falling in District 1. I didn't get a chance to look at the new map or if it's District 2 still. So that's just something I wanted to put on the radar. So I just want to stop there. I'm not ready to approve this tonight. I want us to explore other options for the Council District 1. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is on page 4 of the resolution, there's the last, be it further resolved, it says the governing body reaffirms its support for the endorsement of any legislation that slows down the timeline for eviction. And I'm wondering if we could just say prevents eviction, because I wouldn't want to slow down a timeline. I'd rather just prevent it. So maybe we could just change that language. Because I think there's efforts at the legislature, and I don't know what will be moving through this session, but I think it's important that we're preventing eviction and making any connections to tenants, or or connections with tenants and rental assistance resources, and also providing opportunities, as it says, for mediation between renters and landlords. So I think that's a good one. I just wanted to tweak that. So I will yield the floor for now. I just wanted to let my colleagues know I'm not ready to vote on this. And I know we have a few more meetings before we finalize it. And I know we also have a not deadline. We do have a deadline. We have to submit it to who do we need to submit it to again?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, our deadline is really pre-legislature, what do you call those committee meetings are already happening. Our lobbyist is really anxious to get the conversations going already with legislators. Other people are, so we should be in the mix. So he really needs the final direction from the governing body to start those conversations. And then I think we're planning on having our legislative breakfast early December. And so we have that deadline as well to get the booklet made and make our priorities. And if I could, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Pickleball Project and why it's there. The community has raised $100,000 already for that project, and it's actually a full-on pickleball complex that will be a huge boon to community health, as well as economic development in this community. They want to bring in huge tournaments. We're going to have an indoor and outdoor aspect. So they've raised 100,000, and there's additional funding coming in from the private. So it's important for the city to match that. And we don't have any funding at this time at all to match that private investment. And so when we're looking to leverage private investment, it does bump it up. That's actually also what happened to number 5 priority on our 1 through 5 citywide priorities, right? Was that we were moving for Soccer Valley to match that private investment. And so we are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of private investment that we'd like to match to really bring that complex to reality. It's also part of a bigger picture that we have for Fort Marcy, which is really becoming a really highly used, important venue in the city of Santa Fe. So now it's where Wine and Chili is. It's also where Zozobra is, of course, and the baseball team. And so we really want to make overall some big improvements to that entire Fort Marcy facility to really support people, accessibility, safety. There's a lot of issues we heard back from during Zozobra. There was accessibility issues. So we're looking at really upgrading that whole facility, and the pickleball courts and tournament capabilities would be one of them.
Thank you for that explanation. I do want to make a difference. The MRC project has been a long time coming. Like, it's been over 10 years that we've been trying to find funding sources. And so that one I feel is different. This is a newer project, and I appreciate there's been a community effort for raising money, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to, that we shouldn't have a certain amount that would actually be able to match that. It's just this amount is 750,000 match, and we have these other infrastructure needs that I consistently hear from my constituents, and it's hard for me to tell them, well, we can't fix that particular bridge or street or whatever else, or whatever we need in facilities existing, but we're going to do this new complex. And so I'm trying to find a balance. And so I don't know if the 750,000 is the right amount. And so, and it's, again, I'm not opposed to pickleball. I just think we need to look at the big picture and what are the needs, especially as it relates to safety and infrastructure that we need to get, that we can put on this list that we can't find from other resources.
Oh, thank you so much, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal. We actually can't add the Santa Fe Bridge. The only things that can be considered are items that are already on the ICIP for district priorities. We don't have a scope of work for that bridge replacement. We haven't said we weren't going to repair it. We've only just begun to assess and get a design. It has to go through, it has to incorporate historic review. So we just don't have a cost estimate and a scope for that project. We are definitely going to bring that forward as soon as we have it, for probably for immediate funding, I would think. And I wouldn't think it would be anywhere near $500,000 to repair it, but we just don't have a project scope that we could put on the ICIP at this point.
Understood. That makes sense. I didn't see the pickleball and ICIP list, but I'll have to check it again because I didn't see that. The other one is that we've been trying to do the Cerro Gordo road project forever. And yeah, that one's a big dollar amount too.
It's on the ICIP.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Wheeler, for being here tonight. I did have some questions similar to Councilwoman Villarreal regarding the change in the district requests. Councilwoman Villarreal mentioned District 1. There is also the change in District 3. Did we get Tierra Contenta funded last year?
Yes, you did.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to make sure that because that was on the list last year, this wasn't, just wanted to check in with that.
If I could add a little bit, we're also having some challenges. These fundings that were awarded last January, would have normally had them in our hands. These Tierra Contenta Trail project is well underway and going into construction in the spring. So Romello is really concerned about continuing to have legislative money that's held up now in September. So she's going to have to finish that project possibly without even getting that appropriation. And so we're trying to be strategic about, what can we wait for money until next September to get.
Okay, and why would we have to wait till next September?
A DFA is not releasing our appropriations without the audits.
Interesting. When we were just told different, and publicly folks said it's not delaying any projects.
It won't delay the project. Like I said, we'll look for alternate funding and so
Right,
that we
but-
can finish it.
But the funding is delayed. And
The funding is delayed.
funding is delayed. So I just want folks to be well clear of that.
There are a number of funding sources that aren't not senior services has just released about $3 million that they'd been holding since 2020. And so we just got the grant agreements for that. NMED released the $300,000 for Vereda de Valencia, which was been being held since 2021. We're hoping that NMED will release the Jemez Road, which is very similar to Vereda de Valencia trunk line. That's really important to the legislators, and I think that's why we got it. And so NMED, NMDOT, and the senior services seem to be willing to work with us, but the DFA direct appropriations are not coming through.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Could we get, I guess, a overall total project number? Because you did reference Soccer Valley and we kind of knew what was being brought to the table in sense. There was a private donation. We got the amount of what that was. You had mentioned that there's $100,000 being raised, but what is the overall cost and what are we looking at? Because what you spoke about, an indoor-outdoor facility, 700, even if that's matched to 1.5 million, I don't think that's going to cover an indoor facility. So don't necessarily need it now this meeting, but maybe as we go through the process, if we can get the picture of what the price tag on this pickleball complex would be and what our plan as a city to, if the 750 is what we're bringing to the table, or are we going to look to bring beyond that? And just to have that clearer picture for us.
I can, the picture isn't completely solidified, so we don't have the whole indoor, outdoor, entire complex scoped out yet, like that Soccer Valley plan that, like you said, Councilor Villarreal was approved a long time ago. It's additional outdoor courts that we're focusing on right now. So expanding the ability to play pickleball outside. And they have raised 100,000 already. We're working on an agreement to get that into house, but there's also another $50,000 contribution that we just became aware of. So we're not sure how much they'll raise, but our part is $750,000 for expansion of outdoor courts in partnership with the, but I can try to get you, we're going to actually put together some more information for the legislative booklet. So as soon as I get something like that, I will share it with you.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just so we know what we're working towards instead of saying, well, here's the request, but we don't know ultimately what the final project is.
Those details are in our ICIP, right? So every single project has an entire project profile, and I can send that to you tonight.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then for the other two projects, the District 2 and District 4 that were on last year's list, District 2 was the Pacheco Road project for roughly 264,000, and the District 4 was the Governor Miles Road project for roughly $1 million. Did we get funding for that last year, 100%?
Not 100%. You've gotten a whole bunch of money a year before last. Those each got 300 last year, or 600. That last year they got 300. And so we haven't started those projects. And so we'll just let that money keep continuing to pile up. And then when we get the funding, boom, we can like move right into design and build.
Okay, so I know that the Pacheco project, just because it's in my district, it was a lot more than 264,000. Do we have a tally to date in regards to how much we've asked, how much received, how much we still need to complete the project?
Well, we spoke to the legislature about that. They didn't allow us to list funding that we haven't actually received. So there are appropriations, but we haven't received them. And we do have that tally. It looked like Councilor Villarreal actually sent you some of the data, and I can send that to you as well about exactly that. I think you've received that list of appropriations that have not been received yet. It was an Excel sheet. It was provided. The amounts are all on that as well. But the amount you're seeing there is just the full unfunded amount, since the legislature directed us not to indicate the receipt of funds that we haven't actually received.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. In regards to last year's versus this year's, I do see a couple changes. Can you highlight some significant changes that you feel that we need to be aware of? I'd see, for example, like for League of Municipal Cities, the league, that I don't believe that was on last year's, and I see that.
It's on every year.
Okay.
Yep.
Because it's just the format is different from last year. It's so just trying to, I'm going to cross-reference. If I have any questions, I'll check in with.
Thank you so much, and especially Jesse and Jeff as well. Yes, I think there isn't a lot of changes in the policy part. We do adopt the municipal leagues platform every year because they do a lot of work over there. They have like a really rigorous committee process and an introduction and review process, and they narrow it down. And pretty much what they say is good for cities and good for us.
Understandable. Thank you, Director Wheeler. Don't have any other questions. Yield the floor, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? I just have one follow-up to Councilwoman Villarreal's comment about eviction and how we strike the balance between, there are times that people do need to be evicted, and it's not just because they can't pay, it's because they're breaking lease. So if, as we're looking at that language, you know, with their trash, you know, whatever it is, but there are times when eviction would be appropriate and not necessarily for failure to pay. So just wanted to make that comment, since I know that you'll be looking at that language to make sure that we don't ignore that side of but really looking at assisting people where it is more of a issue with poverty and affordability. And I'm not sure what we would like to do at this juncture. So this does need to move forward due to the time factor. Councilwoman Villarreal, I believe that you will have another stab at this one at finance. If you wanted to be making any changes to the District 1 priorities. So it will need to pass at least one committee to make it a governing body. And I will leave it up to the committee of where you would like to take a motion at this time. Normally, I would say let's hold it and work on it, but we don't have that luxury with this one, unfortunately.
I mean, the fact that we have some time in other committees, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I personally would move it forward without a recommendation.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion to move forward without recommendation. Can I please get a roll call?
Counselor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Chavez,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett.
Yes.
Motion has passed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Director Wheeler. And moving on to our discussion agenda. We are going to consideration of an ordinance amending section 12-10-1.10 of the Uniform Traffic Ordinance governing mufflers and emission control devices, and amending Schedule A of the Uniform Traffic Ordinance to increase penalties for muffler noise violations. Matthew Champlin, DC Champlin should be on Zoom. And we also have Kyle Hibner here, and Connor Murphy is here as well in case we need him. Do we have DC Champlin?
Yes, we have him.
DC.
I'm gonna unmute him.
Yes, go ahead and allow to unmute. So I do have an amendment to this bill that we can there's some discussion that I would like to have with this committee and getting some feedback from this committee about it. But before we do that, are there any other questions or comments for this bill at this time? If you refresh, you will see your amendment. Sorry, go ahead and refresh. It got uploaded late.
Madam Chair, I have questions and I didn't really get to, I'm trying to find it in my email, but there was data request that I had and
Yes, and Loretta should have sent it to you. Did you receive it?
did, but I'm looking for it.
Wonderful.
Where are you?
It's also been uploaded.
Oh, it has.
Gov.
Okay.
It's
Good to
the
know.
second to last attachment titled Muffler Enforcement 18 to 22. And Councilwoman, I will give the floor over to you if you're ready.
I'm looking for it.
DC, are you able to, DC Champlin, are you able to pull it up and share it on the screen?
Yes, I believe I can.
Wonderful.
Can you all see it?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this was there was a couple requests, Councilor Villarreal, that you made that we took down and got some data. So this was the data portion of it. You asked for 2018 to current, what the police department had done citation wise. Looking at the the data 2018 and 2019, it looks like there was very little enforcement when it regards to mufflers. It really picked up heavily in 2020. And then it's been less, but consistent through 2021 and 2022.
Thank you. I think the one nuance I was trying to understand is these are all citations that folks went to court for, or do you know the breakdown of what actually occurred with these citations?
Let's stop there real quick. So I don't have the breakdown of what happened to those citations. In the presentation in the last committee date, we did have the October to October information. I can pull that back up again. Some of the citations will be, we classify anything that's written and handed out to a driver as a citation. Now that might be a warning citation. It could be a court citation, could be a penalty assessment that's accepted. There's a number of ways the disposition could happen as a result of that.
Yeah, that was what I was kind of wanting to get more of a breakdown, but this is helpful. Remind us when what did we call the operation slow and
Quiet.
quiet? What did you call it? Slow and quiet. Okay. Slow and quiet. That took place. Was that 2020 or 2021?
I believe that was 2020, if I remember correctly, because I believe we did two phases of it, part one and a part two.
Okay. And that's what I'm assuming it was because the numbers went up that year, the 57. So I think that was a result of the concentrated operation. And there was two parts, you said?
I believe we did a part one and a part two to slow and quiet. If I remember correctly, we focused the first part, and I'm speaking anecdotally here. I don't have the data in front of me. I believe the first part was in the northern part of the city, where we get the most complaints, the plaza area, where people are walking around, pedestrians, etc. And I believe we focused the second part in the north was still included, but we also included the south side because we had some complaints, I believe, down by Airport Road. But I have to really look into it.
Okay. Maybe you could just let me know more about that one. I'm just curious because I didn't know there was two parts. I just remembered the one that was focused in the northern part since it was my district. But that would be helpful. Thanks for the breakdown. I need to look at what did we get? This amendment now. I haven't looked at it, so I'll yield the floor while I look at this. Thanks.
Councilor Villarreal, if I may, real quick, while you're still on the mic.
Yes.
There were two other things that the city attorney's office looked into just to touch for you. You asked about the excessive fines, if there was law or bill, anything that would prohibit that. So the city attorney pulled the New Mexico Constitution. There's one provision in that in Article 2. All it does is state that we can't have any it's illegal to have any excessive fines, bail, or cruel punishment, so to speak. And I'm gonna pull my note here real quick. Currently, the way that City Attorney Aaron McSherry is explained it is, since the fine that's being proposed is comparable to other cities in like jurisdictions, excuse me, it wouldn't be considered excessive.
Okay, so the way they just assess what could be or construed as excessive would be they compare it with other jurisdictions. I'm looking at our attorney here about if they're comparing it based on jurisdictions within the state or.
Chair Cassid, Councilor Villarreal. So just wanting to expand on what DC Champlin said, there actually isn't a state statute that specifically gives municipalities.
Move the mic over a little bit.
Sorry.
Thank you.
There's a statute that specifically gives municipalities basically authority to go up to 90 days in jail or a $500 fine. So, constitutionally, which is what DC Champlin was saying in regards to excessive fines, I think the city is under that here. Also statutorily, based on that section, the city is in line with that as well, with the proposal.
And the 500 you said was actually stated in that?
Correct. It basically says that cities can enforce the ordinances by imprisonment up to 90 days or a $500 fine, which is typically what we have in our general under our criminal code, up to 90 days, up to a $500 fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other members of the committee, questions, comments at this time? Councilor Michael Garcia.
Madam Chair. Thank you, DC Champlin, for the updated stats. Really appreciate that. One question, and I don't know if you'll be able to provide further clarification, but in 2020, there's 57 citations, and then it went down to 32 in 2021, and then up by 4 to 36 in this year to date. I know that the noise hasn't decreased. It's probably, if I'm going off the feedback from constituents, it's only increased. And so just wondering why we're seeing a decrease in citations. Is it becoming more challenging for you and your team to issue the citations? Just if you have any further information to help me understand why we went from 57 to 32 to currently 36 for this calendar year.
Sure, Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia. So I don't have the exact question for it. Or I'm sorry, the exact answer for it, but there was that heavier focus on it in 2020. And I'm fairly certain that was when Slow and Quiet was, and there was a real heavy focus on that particularly. Moving into like 2021, 2022, we did have critical staffing levels through that time. And again, going back to our last conversation in the last time we met, talking about priorities. So when we heavily focus on something because it becomes a hot topic or a large complaint coming from your constituents, then we see an increase in the enforcement. It's just a natural, cause and effect, so to speak. But there's no real reason why it dips or any other reason other than the fact that it may have been focused on heavier in 2020 versus 2021 and 2022.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
I don't think it's representative of necessarily the problem, if that makes sense.
Sure, it definitely does. And the data in the slide, is that citations for mufflers or citations regarding, can you clarify what the number is representing?
It's specifically regarding muffler noise.
Okay, because I took a look at the data provided at least through the first round of Slow and Quiet. I don't know if we did a round 2 of phase 2, but there was 9 citations issued in 2020. So that would bump it down off of 57 to what, 48 that were issued outside of Slow and Quiet. And so that's still higher than last year and this year to date. So I think I understand you said that probably because the emphasis is there. I don't know if, I'm not trying to say the emphasis is down with your team. I'm just having a real hard time understanding why we issued so many and then we're just decreasing. And again, as we mentioned last time, I want to make sure we're providing you with sufficient tools to help us alleviate this challenge. And if there was something you were doing different back then, that might not be the way practice has been conducted now. Help me understand that, or just, again, I want to make sure that we're letting the public know we're doing everything we can. We're throwing the kitchen sink at this problem, and we're working our tails off to address it.
Sure. And I mean, for 2020, there was a heavy emphasis on it. And just because there was the operation, and I'm glad that you have the statistics there, because I don't know them offhand. So if 9 were done in slow and quiet, it doesn't mean that the emphasis wasn't placed within the department as a whole. It just means that for slow and quiet, it may have been during that portion. It wasn't only muffler citations. If you all remember, in 2020, a big portion of what was happening was drag racing and speeding and other reckless type driving. So there was a big emphasis on a lot of other driving or dangerous driving behavior, not just mufflers, but there was an emphasis on mufflers as well. So that emphasis carries throughout our department. Generally, when we're doing an operation, I'll give you an example, Operation Centralized Aid that the bike team just started on the 18th, so yesterday. That's focused in the Cerritos corridor, Zafrano, Harrison Road, any of the problem areas that we have around there, and really helping out. Just because they're doing the operation there doesn't mean the emphasis doesn't bleed over to the rest of the department, and they help out as well. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it 100% answers it, but there has been emphasis through 2021 and 2022, although it may not have been at the same citation level as 2020.
Right. No, thank you. It does help to provide some context to it. So I really appreciate that, DC Champlin. My next question revolves around problematic areas. And I think we've heard loud and clear that we see a challenge downtown, the immediate downtown Santa Fe, and there are a couple of more of our main thoroughfares that are become more popular for one reason or another. And I guess my question is, is there a plan in place to potentially begin to target some of these problematic areas? For example, I just received a call today from a constituent who they're downtown, right off down Gaspar and Water Street area, and they know when the problem is. It's during the late hours, 10 p.m. to roughly 3 a.m. during, as I mentioned to the constituent, that's a hub where a lot of our nightlife is, and we see probably a lot of increased traffic. And I guess my question is, are we looking at potentially targeting some of these areas that we know that have been problematic, whether it's the Galisteo, San Francisco Street area, where folks tend to take their cruises and whether it be rev their engines or just have a loud vehicle by nature. Is there a way where we can begin to work with community members to say, look, we've got a law in place, and begin to educate the community and let folks know this isn't going to be tolerated down here. So I didn't know what you and your team might be having, DC.
Sure. And I mean, when it comes to the specific area you're talking about right now, like the Don Gaspar water area, I haven't heard anything. And I just actually mentioned this to the chief not too long ago. I haven't heard anything from the plaza area in recent months regarding a lot of traffic complaints, which is good. If there's a particular constituent that knows this is happening at this time and it's very beneficial to share that information with us, would be great, because then we can put the area officers in there. If it's a bigger problem and we start getting several complaints on a problem, and it's kind of an escalating system with us, and all police departments nationwide, the problem starts out small, and we assess it and see what we need to do with that. And intelligence drives tactics, so to speak. So how much do we need to deploy to solve the problem? The bigger the problem gets, if you remember, I think it was 2020 or end of 2019, when we did downtown focus phase 1 and phase 2. During that time, we had it was a much bigger problem, and this wasn't just driving. This was just the quality of life in the downtown area in general. And we had 2 meetings, both that I spoke at with the chief at that time, Chief Padilla, and the mayor and other city executives and councilors that were there. And we're talking a room of 100 to 150 people. So if it gets to the bigger the problem gets and the more people it affects, we start reaching out to bigger portions to get that data in and to see what's going on and talk to people. Regarding, are we doing anything right now specifically for that area? I don't think we have anything planned for it. I'll give you the one that has come up the most recently, has been the Cerritos corridor, Airport Road, Zafrano. The turn coming out of Sprouts has been brought up by several people, just because they're making wrong turns there and it's being dangerous. So we've shared that information with the Operation Centralized Aid as well, to make sure that they're kind of keeping an eye on some of these complaints. And one of the good things when we have on these focused operations, the bike team always moves from the downtown area to other parts of the city. They're kind of our Swiss Army knife during the winter months, because they have a different function during those months because it's cold. So we're able to move them around the city into problem areas. And when they're doing these operations, we can reach out to them in real time while they're working and say, hey, this is a problem. This just popped up yesterday. Can you guys go check this out? Maybe it's an encampment where it shouldn't be. Maybe it's a traffic issue. Whatever that is, we can reach out to them and they can help us out. So specifically for the Don Gaspar water area right now, no. But if we know when that's happening, you can reach out to your constituent and have them email me. We can definitely, or give me a call. We can talk about it and see what's going on.
Sure, definitely. I appreciate that offer, and I'll make that connection soon. Since we're still debating the overall topic of the proposed legislation, I still have concerns and trouble regarding enforcement. And I'm wondering if we're maybe chomping at this from the wrong angle, where we see, or not we see, we hear, and we notice a lot of the obstruction in the late night hours when the city tends to quiet down. Not to say it doesn't happen during the day, but that's when it becomes obviously much more noticeable. I'm wondering if another route for us to address this challenge would be to look at enforcing quiet times for the city, and where it allows for constituents to know that there is this period of time where we are going to expect somebody with a classic vehicle. They're not going to be cruising down the street waking up the neighborhood, unless it's some extenuating circumstance that got to take somebody to the hospital or whatnot. But I think looking at it from this angle, we're putting ourselves in a position where we're beginning to penalize a certain portion of our community for what I would say is a smaller group of folks. That mentality of one bad apple spoils the bunch. And I think we should be looking at it from maybe a different angle, because again, the enforcement, whether it's through the driver or through the installers, it can be somewhat challenging and very problematic. And I think DC Champlin, last time we spoke, you had mentioned it was challenging. I mean, for example, my daughter and I have different senses of hearing. When I jump in the car, I have it at a 14 always, and she knows I know when she gets in the car, I take it down to a 7 because she can't handle the music that loud. And a 7 to me is like a mouse peeping, but to her, it's like a huge rock concert. And we've got to understand that unless there are certified tools in place to allow DC Champlin and his team to utilize data to then convict people or charge people with an offense, that's the route we need to look at. But I think DC Champlin, last time we spoke, there was potentially some resistance, for example, like decibel readers. And I guess my question is, you mentioned last time it was around training and updating of materials, et cetera. And I completely understand that, but I look at it from a different perspective, and I'm putting my challenge of, like we're seeing with our finances currently. you have a whole crew of folks that were used to doing our finances a different way. And now that we're incorporating Munis, it takes a whole new training and incorporation and way we approach conducting business. And so my question, DC Champlin, is how much pushback would we get from you and your team if that is a route we decided to take to put that decibel reader tool into your toolkit and began to provide you and your team with sufficient resources for training, for the updating that will be needed, et cetera. Because again, I want to make sure we're giving you every capable tool to move forward with this challenge.
Sure. No pressure on that question. How would I support that? So with the decibel readers, it's not that it's not supporting it or not supporting it. The way that I do everything that comes through my wheelhouse, so to speak, just like this ordinance, is reaching out to other departments, reaching out outside of the state, reaching out to see what are other people doing. Is it working? Is it not working? Is there technology that we could utilize that we're not utilizing, which is what sparked the conversation weeks ago regarding the noise cameras that could be mounted and be stationary. We're still kind of in the process of that, but it's a very, very, very infant conversation, so to speak. So with the decibel readers, I don't have much information on it other than from personal experience, again, anecdotally. Mufflers are harder to enforce, and I don't know if I want to put the officer, if I would support putting the officers into a box to the aspect of if they're in traffic and they hear a muffler that they can reasonably testify to based on their training experience, and Kyle can come in and work his articulation into the court and work it that way. I don't know if I would support necessarily boxing them in to having a specific reader. Now on the back end of that, when we talk about the fix-it ticket, and I did look a little bit into that with California, what they're doing is they issue the ticket based on probable cause for the violation of the crime, which being a loud muffler. The individual has an opportunity to go and fix it. They have to bring that vehicle back to an officer. The officer has to then evaluate the vehicle. If it is under the limit, which it should be, the citation is signed by the officer. That citation is taken to the judge, and then the judge sees that the officer has checked that the vehicle has been fixed, and then it's done. It's dismissed. So I could see a decibel reader coming into play at the point of where there is a necessary time to really evaluate it by a decibel, we'll say, if it's loud or not. But at the time when most of these officers are going to be encountering this, they're not going to be standing, unless they're working a special operation or something that we specifically have them standing out at the plaza, we'll say. It's not going to happen. They're going to be in their vehicles, in traffic, at airport and Cerritos Road, stopped at a stoplight, and then see a vehicle take off, and then a muffler noise be emitted that's probably too loud. And that's going to be more often than not. So I don't know where I'd hate to invest a lot of effort or money into decibel readers, training with the officers, putting that through the institution as a whole, updating our way of it, which I'm not against. I'd like to move forward with anything that is. I want to be clear with that. I just don't know if it's practical is the best part.
Understandable. And I think that's why we're leaning on you and your team's expertise to see what ultimately would work. I mean, I have, honestly, I don't know if it would work or not. And that's where I'd want to lean on your experience and your team's experience. And like I said, be able to provide you with the tool to know that there is a process that you and your team can firmly stand behind, and know that, for example, with the radar gun, you know, if somebody's going X amount of speed with the decibel reader, they've got X amount of decibels being put out. And so thank you. I really appreciate that clarification. With that, no other questions, Madam Chair. DC Champlin, just want to thank you so much for your continued time and effort. I know you're doing your own research and looking into it. And if there is anything you come across during your looking into the matter, please share that with us. I think that's where it helps us as we go through this process together. So thank you, DC Champlin. Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Counselor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, thank you for being here, DC Chaplin, and answering the questions and some of our concerns. I'm still kind of toying or having trouble with the issue of enforceability. And, you know, going back to questions from Counselor Michael Garcia, just previously in regards to how do we qualify that the muffler is too loud? Obviously, we can hear it from miles away, but when you just take, for example, when you give somebody a speeding ticket, well, the first thing that you're going to do is say, well, I clocked you on the radar. Or I guess there's other methods, whereas you would be pacing out a car or so on and so forth. And you would then go to, if you had to go to court and with the person to defend your position as to why they were speeding and how they were speeding and how fast they were speeding and what are going to be the fines and proved to under court of law. So now we're going back to the noise issue, and when you stop someone with again, how would that be determined when an officer stops somebody that has a vehicle that is louder than most and says, okay, you are being disruptive to the community, your muffler is too loud, I'm going to issue a citation. And so does that go off of, again, what the officer experienced? And if we don't have ways to read this, I guess that's kind of some of the area that I'm having issues with. I'll let you answer. Thank you.
Sure. And I don't have I don't think 100% the answer you're going to be looking for, but let me answer it to the extent that I can. And I think Kyle can actually, since he's there, maybe weigh in a little bit on the court's perspective, because he's ultimately the one that has to prosecute it. But for the officer's perspective, the way that the law reads, and it says unusually excessive or loud, it's the unusual part that when an officer who is trained and has experience, they go through a field training program, they learn how to run, we call it running traffic arbitrarily, but they learn how to look out for traffic violations. They learn how to do all these things. No different than if an officer was to articulate if a vehicle is driving carelessly or something specific to that, recklessly, or speeding is, like you said, there's a radar for it. If we want to quantify that with a decibel reader, it's would it be feasible and could we get that recording, so to speak, while we're driving in traffic? And it's not as feasible. So we rely heavily on the officer's articulation and then Kyle's presentation to the court as to how that unfolds within the court to determine it beyond a reasonable doubt, so to speak. The officer's only threshold legally is probable cause. All they have to have is probable cause to determine that the crime was more than likely committed. It was probable based on certain facts, evidence, or observations. And if that's there, they can issue the citation. And once that citation is issued, then it's the officer's job to go into court and articulate it. It's his job to prosecute that and work with the officer to do that case within court. And Kyle, I know since he's there, he may be able to speak to, he's had successful cases, I believe, as far as the prosecution goes. He may be able to speak a little bit more on like the groundwork for the court.
Sure.
Can you get a little closer to the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's acting up, so.
Okay. So, there is a little bit of fair amount of subjectivity, I suppose, in this ordinance. But just a couple of points on that. In many, and DC Champlin alluded to this, but there's many places in the law where there's a fair amount of subjectivity. He mentioned careless driving. Another one that I usually use an example for is a DWI if there is not a breath score. So in those situations, I'm having to show that this person was impaired, basically, and not safe to operate the vehicle. I suppose there's some subjectivity even with that. So, just to expound on what DC Champlin said, it is going to come down a lot to the officer's his training, his experience. I think he mentioned last time just kind of an anecdotal story that I had about a successful prosecution in which it was one of the traffic officers who is in basically traffic for 8 hours a day or however long his shift is. He's hearing thousands of cars, if not more a day. How is he, how can he articulate why this car is excessive or unusual noise? So that's a factor in it. All the officers have body cameras now. That's something that I evaluate too. What does it sound like on the body cam when the officer approaches? Also, does the defendant make any admissions? For example, if the officer goes up and says, "Hey, your car's pretty loud." Oh yeah, I put in a glass pack, for example. That's part of the amendment. I think at that point, your case is building a lot, it's steps, right? So it's getting up to that reasonable doubt standard. It is subjective, but it still has to be proved beyond reasonable doubt. It is in the eye of the beholder, in this case, the judge, to some extent. I think that's part of what the practice of law is. It's if it's not a speeding, if it's not a DWI with a breast score, it's not just putting in a set of numbers and getting back a result, so to speak.
Thank you for the answers. And again, I'm trying to walk myself through the steps of how, going back to what is our reasoning for bringing this forward. And I know that there are issues with noise, street noise specifically in regards to vehicles. And trying to identify that just mufflers and noisy mufflers are the main cause and the root cause and the reason for this. And so if we go into an officer's ability to identify that a vehicle is loud, and then proceed on with the traffic stop, or whatever that may be, issuing a citation. Now it goes to court. We've gone through this whole process. They have these excessive fines that are pretty expensive. I know some of the ideas from some of my colleagues have been to maybe fix it or ticket. And so now they have an opportunity to go back and fix their vehicle. But going back to enforceability, without that person being able to go to court, they will be able to go to court or take the fine, I guess, similar to a speeding ticket, I'm assuming. I didn't see anywhere in here where they couldn't just take the fine. But I'm still struggling with that final issue of enforceability. And again, going back to some of our previous legislation and being counterproductive in regards to fining and people that don't show up to court and things like that, you can just draw out. So I will leave that right there as far as my comments. The other thing, a question I would have is, so I'll start off with a comment in regards to, we have a huge culture of people, of a huge car culture in northern New Mexico. And I think, in here we mentioned glass packs. And so there may be vehicles that have glass packs already installed in their cars. If they were to stop to be cruising their car down on a Friday night and obviously be stopped by an officer, what would be, again, they'd be subject to a fine. They would be then go to court and then possibly, if allowed, to fix it. Okay, so now you got to put a muffler in there. Well, that might not go along with the vehicle. And so, maybe there's something in there that we need to really look at in terms of some of these older vintage vehicles that have modified exhaust systems. I want to take just give you an example. The other day, old Model 4 T-Bucket was at my shop, and it has straight pipes. You're not going to be able to modify that vehicle. And so the person who owns that vehicle may not be able to drive it or be subjected to this fine. And it doesn't really make sense to me. So again, they may not be creating a noise at the time. during the day, but let's say they're at night and they're cruising that car and they're blasting out everybody's ears, I think it's pointing back to maybe looking at noise reduction through certain quiet times. And I think that's kind of where I'm headed with this versus because again, it goes back to the times that these are happening, and not only that, but when they are happening, a lot of times it's street racing and other issues that are happening. And so I would just like to maybe hear your comments based on that, and in regards to the many people who already have cars that have devices that aren't necessarily straight piped, or there's so many different ways to create noise in a vehicle, and I don't know if just targeting mufflers is the full answer for this. So, thank you.
I'm just making sure I'm going to answer that, and Kyle's not there. I don't want to override him there. All right, I think we're good. So I'm sorry, I can't see Kyle. I can only see you, Counselor. So with that being said, the vehicles that have they're, like you said, the older model. I think I mentioned this last time. I have a captain who is one of my staff who oversees the patrol section. He is a car guru. That is what his entire retirement is planned out to be. I hear it about every day. In 2 years, he'll be doing nothing but building cars. And that's what he does. They're all old cars, they're beautiful cars. And we discussed this with the mufflers and how that would affect him cruising his car through Santa Fe, and and he's the people you're talking about is what I'm getting at. And I don't know if there is a perfect fix for this. And I think that's why we're here. This Councilor Lindell's main push for this, I think, is to increase the fine. So that right now it's at $25 to make it a reasonable thing that's a deterrence. Will that work 100%? I think that's to be said. We don't know. We don't have any, equivocal data, to say otherwise, or to say it'll work or it won't work. But the people that already have their cars, the quiet time, I don't know. I'm thinking about when you bring up quiet time, and Councilor Garcia is bringing up quiet time, I started thinking about enforceability in that aspect, and how the police department would, let's say it's 10 o'clock at night and it's 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning, and we're not going to allow loud vehicles during that moment of time. So those people that already have the vehicles, they know to stay, I guess for lack of a better term, to stay away from if their vehicle meets this threshold of loudness during these times of the day, and they wouldn't be subject to these fines. And I'm not wholly against that, or necessarily for it or against it. There's this dichotomy between, we want to make sure we're enforcing and improving the quality of life for what the citizens of, especially the downtown and Plaza boombox area, and for the Cerritos corridor area and Airport Road, that they're asking for, but we want to do it in a manner that is equitable for everybody. And I think that's why we're here having this discussion tonight. So the quiet time may be an idea. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not for it just yet either. I'd like to see more about it. I'm curious to see if other people have, or other cities, have taken any kind of approach like that, if it's been beneficial, if it's worked, or if it's been a hard pushback with limiting citizens as a whole, the city as a whole. And we're saying at 10 o'clock, you can't be loud past this point with your vehicle past this point, or coming to the city at this point. How that would be taken by socially as a whole, I guess we could say. And then the police department being charged to enforce that.
Thank you very much, DC Chaplain. And I guess the last question I would have in regards to it kind of still revolves around enforceability, but at the same time, so going back to people who modify their vehicles, yes, many times they will take them to an automotive shop. And I think the last time you were here, you did mention there are plenty of shops in Santa Fe that do some pretty cool things with vehicles and with exhaust systems and so on and so forth. And so, again, I think if their intention is to create an environment where everybody is racing down the road, creating a lot of noise, I don't necessarily feel that is necessarily their intentions. I think their intentions are to create a cool vehicle. And, when somebody turns it on, it has that rumble and it sounds. And so, going back to possibly giving fines to those who install mufflers, and again, back to enforceability, obviously if they can produce a ticket, where was this muffler installed? Who knows where it was installed? Maybe the muffler was ordered off of Amazon or eBay. They took it to somebody and they charged them cash to put it in there. And so again, how do we enforce that? And so, those are just some of the issues that I have with this, obviously understanding and coming from an automotive background. Knowing that we do have a problem with noise at certain times and how that's tied into street racing and things that are very dangerous to our community, other than just the noise part of it. And I don't necessarily know that just targeting loud, noisy mufflers is the complete solution. I think there's more to it. And I think the conversation has to revolve more around when these things are happening and how it affects the overall, not only quality of life, but safety of our community. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Chavez?
Thank you. I really just have a comment. I feel like there's been a lot of incredible input around this. And I think what is clear with what everyone says is that we might find ourselves having this discussion later on, despite what decision is made either way for a solution, because it's really going to be dependent on data, kind of like the data you shared, and just the positive impact it's either having or not having. I think the solution is action, and then us reassessing whether that action is effective and really addressing the issue and what other impacts it's really having. And we won't be able to actually see that without actually moving forward with some type of action. And I know Councillor Cassett's going to be introducing an amendment that I am in support of. But that's very clear. I feel like we all have a lot of ideas around what can be done, but we don't have a great idea yet of how it will positively impact the actual issue. And what I'm thinking is that's going to be the reality of this and trying to address this problem is that once we enforce something, we might find ourselves having this discussion again and maybe considering amendments to make it better. It may need to be an evolving solution in addressing a complicated issue that is difficult to enforce and does take a matter of, it's based on probable, whether we can't really prove it in the moment, which I think a lot of and you could correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of your officers are faced to make those decisions every day, correct?
Yes, Counselor.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of subjectivity involved in a lot of decisions. But it's just the fact that we need to move forward with some type of action. And if we need to reassess as leadership, then we do that. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Okay, so.
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes.
just one other question about that we had talked about in the last meeting is if there were the folks that were supporting this, if the stakeholder that we didn't hear from or that we were hoping there'd be outreach is the auto business. And we also said auto dealerships, but do you know if there has been any outreach to that stakeholder group? Because this will directly impact them.
Not that I'm aware of.
Counselor, I can speak to that briefly. We did get some information from some auto groups. I am at the moment waiting I reached out to the chamber to see if they have kind of some contacts that I could reach out to. I have not yet received that suggestion. And then that was something that I had asked Connor on. So I'll get to that as I talk about the amendment because yeah, I'll get there, but that is something I've been trying to get some time to do.
Right. Thank you. Well, you aren't a sponsor, so I was wondering if the sponsors did that. And then the other thing is solutions. Yeah, they could come in different forms. I guess what I struggle with is the biggest issues I see when I'm driving around town and also from constituents. Obviously, noise is one of them, but street racing and running red lights. Those seem to be easier to actually enforce because you have a mechanism to show, well, you have the speed cameras, sorry, not speed cameras, No, I'm thinking of the radars. Thank you. And then also just the fact that folks are running red lights. That happens so much. That is an actual physical safety issue that could involve all these other people. So that's what's hard for me is like these issues, they're connected, but then when I hear from my colleague, Councilor Lee Garcia, about these different ways of modifying vehicles, some are manufactured already in the vehicle, some are modifications for older models. And I'm like, that's going to be a hard call for our police officers. And then I don't want it ever to lead to anything, not that I think our officers do this, but I don't want any room for any kind of racial profiling that, even the fact that the folks that do this, there's probably a demographic and they're primarily younger that we've seen, or at least I see around town. Yeah, I guess those are the things that I'm like, then how are we targeting this specific demographic? And then we're not thinking about all the other noise factors that are nuisances for us in the city that aren't being targeted. So I talked about this last time. It's just, it's really hard for me to try to figure this out. And we know that this has been, on everyone's mind now, especially in the summer when everybody's windows were open and it was painful. So, okay, it was just trying to figure out if we'd covered our bases with other stakeholders, but it sounds like not yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Yeah, it's on my to-do list. Honestly, trying to figure out this amendment proposal has taken up a lot of time and energy, and just really, I feel like every turn I take uncovers the complexity of this issue. A few kind of follow-up comments to some of the things that have been said. I know that we hear a lot about it at night, but I do also have constituents who complain about it during the day as well. And another population that I've heard from is those who are, it's not hearing impaired, but people who have hearing sensitivities. And so just as kind of we're looking at this entire realm of how we balance out the different needs of our community, I think at the end of the day, these loud cars really are a quality of life issue that are causing, concerns for people. And again, I do not know enough about car restoration. And so I'm wondering about, kind of some of these older models. Do we need to put in something, when we look at the original bill, and there was this piece that was taken out, but it looks like there's a New Mexico state statute that says that every registered gasoline fueled motor vehicle manufactured or assembled beginning with 1968 shall at all times be equipped and maintained in good working order with the factory installed devices and equipment or the replacements designed to prevent, reduce, or control exhaust emissions or air pollution. So that's really talking about exhaust emissions and air pollution. And I am curious, how does anything that's at the state level interact with this conversation here? Because it looks like, well, that's being taken out of our ordinance. It's not that that's gone.
So I know maybe Kyle can speak to it a little bit, but so we have the difference between ordinances and state statutes. The state statute obviously is there, and if the officers wanted to enforce the state statute, they have an option to do so. So they could enforce that particular state statute and go through magistrate court, and it would be adjudicated through that way. If they enforce a city ordinance, which generally speaking, in the city of Santa Fe, really is a mover and a shaker when it comes to doing new things. So when we do something new, like an ordinance, whatever that is, or a new law, or whatever it is that we're changing or modifying, we tend to go that way when it comes to enforcement. And it's not that the officer doesn't have discretion, but we emphasize the city ordinance and I'll go, something very similar to this would be like when the city, I want to say, decriminalized paraphernalia, drug paraphernalia, marijuana pipe, for instance. That was the route that we took, was a city ordinance route, and we discouraged enforcing the state law. So it's very similar to this. I can't speak specifically to why that was taken out of the ordinance. I wasn't involved in the ordinance process as far as the amendment goes. I was just asked to be the face for you all to answer questions on behalf of the police department. That would be a better question for Jesse and his staff.
Thank you. And I assume that this has to do with us being home rule municipality.
Chair Cass said that's correct. And in a lot of situations, a lot of times we have a mirror ordinance to state statute. I'm going to use DWI as an example again, but we have our own DWI ordinances. And so it's getting into a lot of preemption issues, home rule municipality, which Santa Fe is, versus, are we preempted from operating in this area by the state?
Thank you. So I'll just talk about the amendment. It is a little bit of a, I would say at this point, this is coming forward because I am curious about the conversation. I'm not necessarily sure that this amendment is fully ready to go. The concept behind this, and Kyle, correct me if I misspeak because we have had a lot of conversations around this, is that the individual who would receive a citation would have the ability to fix the modification. They would pass a compliance test within 60 days of the citation being issued, and they would then not be convicted and therefore not be fined. So this would allow them, because, at the end of the day, it's not that we want to convict people. We don't want their money. We just really would like to solve this issue. So that's what this really gets at, is that they have that option to provide that proof that they have fixed the vehicle, or proof that they actually did not have a modification to begin with in the first place. And why I started going towards those modifications is these conversations around subjectivity is, what is too loud? And there are factory installed options that does make the car louder. From my very limited understanding, and Councilor Lee Garcia has so much more, that those tend to be a lower noise threshold than some of the modifications that are done post-factory that are explicit to making the vehicle extra loud. So there was a lot of conversation about how this done. I did have an opportunity to speak with Chad Chittum to understand the administrative process at the court. And very clearly just the administrative process. He very specifically cannot give me advice on policy. So I want to put that on the record. We just really talked about looking at this from the administrative perspective, if this would be something that would be doable at the courts, if there is similar structures already in place. And there are sometimes not explicitly stated, he used, for example, I think speeding tickets, and there can sometimes be, a component where they will say, if you go do this, you won't have to pay. So that's what the structure is based off. Kyle, if you have anything else to add about kind of some of the nuance of this discussion, please feel free. It does sound like there's still a lot. I wish I had more time to work on this. Unfortunately, we cannot hold it at this committee any longer. We do have to take action on it tonight, even if that is just moving it along. This bill does hit both Public Works and Finance. So there still is some time to be really looking into these issues. I would ask the members of the Quality of Life Committee, there's a lot of components coming up, and I'm happy to do as much as I can researching a lot of these issues. But if y'all are able to as well, this is just so complex. And because we are on this path right now in terms of timing, I would suggest that perhaps of looking into some of these other options. So I'm sorry, I will stop rambling. Kyle, if you had anything to add.
Chair Captain, the only thing, or one of the first things I'm going to add is, the discussion went to, I think everyone wants it to just be fixed, right? So the discussion was, is this something that should be written in, that it could be fixed before someone gets adjudicated or after someone gets adjudicated? And I believe the amendment that is submitted is pre-adjudication. But there is places where this is specifically written into the ordinance, something similar anyway. For example, for no insurance, there's a section written in that says basically if someone provides proof before they come to court that they had insurance on the date that they were cited, that they won't be convicted. A lot of the language is pulled or inspired, I guess I should say, from the noise ordinance, which does have a section specifically for motor vehicle noise as well. But that one sets specific decibel levels, but it does allow someone to get basically get the fines waived if they fix the muffler. And you know, just one more thing. Currently, when I see these tickets come across my desk, I mean, I think that's probably what Mr. Tatum was alluding to, is if you show me proof that you've fixed this issue, I'll dismiss it, because ultimately, someone would say that the only, I don't know if it's an issue, but I'm going to call it an issue with that, is that it's discretionary, right? So if it's specifically written into the ordinance, then that's something that has to follow. Whereas if not, you know, if a different prosecutor comes in or a different judge, I think they have that discretion to either offer something like that or not.
Madam Chair, just to follow up on what Kyle said, did you say the fix-it options exists right now at the state level?
No, and come out. Excuse me, DC mentioned fix it. Then we'll put being some other of the traffic ordinances, as well as potentially changing the citations that the officers give. And I think there's a lot of other issues that haven't been potential issues that haven't been vetted with that. But in any event, you know, I think it probably is beyond the scope of this bill.
And just to clarify, so whether or not somebody presents proof of fixing it, it is at the discretion right now of Mr. Hibner and the courts to say, great job, no fine, no citation for you. But it is not explicit. So a different prosecutor, a different judge could say, okay, you fixed it, but we have probable cause to believe that you were still guilty. So even though you have fixed it now, we're still going to fine you, and you're still going to have a conviction on your record. So this specifically would be saying if they have fixed it, no fine, no conviction. Any other further questions, comments, honestly, thoughts from the committee? I've really struggled with this one, so I'm really looking for thoughts about this. Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going back to fix it. How do you fix that vehicle that I just explained that has an open engine with pipes that come out, look kind of cool? They're going to be loud. They're less loud than not having anything on there. But how do you fix that? You can't install mufflers on them. It's a classic car that somebody's put their life into. And again, I can see where that is discretion. Now, if this person is taking this vehicle and driving down Cerritos Road or the downtown area at 10, 11 o'clock at night, creating havoc, I guess that can be discretionary. And I guess that maybe could be discretionary to the officer when they see this action happening. So then when they go get the opportunity to fix it, there is really no fix for that vehicle. What happens then?
Sure, Cassidy. is what's before the committee. You can to the fine.
Can I clarify your question or I have a question?
Sure.
following on a question. In this scenario that you're discussing, has the car we're talking about kind of like a classic vehicle. Has it been modified specifically to with things that specifically make it louder than it would be other than just a classic vehicle that maybe has gone through restoration?
I think that the answer to that question is that everything about this vehicle has been modified. There really isn't any devices that probably could be installed other than taking it back to what a factory would have been back in 1929, because it's an old Model T or a Model A or Model something that somebody built. And so in that regards, I think there's almost you take away complete the nostalgia of that vehicle. And again, I guess there is opportunity to fix it, but then might they just pay the fine and say, you know what, okay, I'll pay the fine until the next time.
Yeah, they definitely have that option. I guess and that's why I was wondering, like, would it make sense? And this would be something that maybe you and I can have a bigger discussion offline, to put a year kind of gap in there, if we're really talking about some of these classic vehicles. But I think ultimately, I mean, that is kind of the policy question that this committee and eventually the governing body is charged with, is that what is acceptable in terms of loud vehicles? And so, yeah, that is the question we are grappling with right now.
Difficult. And if I may just also, reading through the question that was raised earlier, as far as a classic vehicle, I think 20 years is considered a classic vehicle. So we're 2022, so 2000, anything prior to 2002 is considered a classic. Let's go into, for the example, and back again to, I'm back towards noise, and I think this is going back towards noise. I had a conversation with someone and they raised the question about catalytic converters getting cut out. And that's a noisy vehicle, and you may not be able to repair that vehicle for X amount of time because of cost, because of availability, because of so on. And I know that's not what this is. What we're talking about here in regards to addressing the noise issue, but somebody may not have the means to fix their vehicle immediately. And that goes back to, are we addressing the issue of noise, and going back to, are people able to fix their vehicles immediately, and enforceability and all those things. And so these are absolutely great conversations that we're having, and I think that's why we're having him here at this committee level. So I'll stop there as well. Thank you.
Counselor, to follow up on that one, because I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another component of this that I think maybe got missed in the amendment conversation. One, we also know that people like to steal catalytic, am I saying it right? Catalytic converters. And what happens if somebody has their catalytic converter stolen? And to your point, that there isn't, that they do not have the finances to get it fixed right away. And Kyle, with how this ordinance is written, first of all, if it is stolen, they should file a police report, because that's good evidence that, hey, something was stolen. But two, within this ordinance, either the proposed or the potentially amended, or both, is there the judicial discretion to really look at that scenario and say, there's something different going on here? There is, because that is a modification that people make, but it's also something that happens to people, and we do not want to be wrongfully penalizing somebody that has had their parts of their car burglarized or stolen. So can you speak to that?
Councillor Cassett. I think the judge is always going to have the discretion whether or not to find guilt or not. Now, is there something in the ordinance as it's presented that makes a carve out for that? I don't think there is. Because it's talking about all these vehicles need to have a good working muffler or noise control device. So as far as ordinance, I don't think there is giving that discretion, but I think the judge does have the discretion on whether or not he or she is going to find the person guilty. And it may be that, it's an extenuating circumstance and the defendant should be found not guilty.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Council, for bringing that up. I forgot that was another issue I wanted to discuss. So given the lateness of the hour and the fact that I don't think that this committee is going to resolve a lot of the questions right now, we cannot hold this bill again per our procedural rules. We have a couple options for it. We can move it forward to the next committee. We can see if there are either the votes to approve it or deny it. A unanimous denial by this committee would at this time prevent the bill from moving forward as presented. My personal opinion is that this is an issue that we cannot not address. That this is something that I feel that there's a real issue in this community and a lot of people that are really struggling here. My proposal would be to move this forward without recommendation. Again, it hits both Public Works and Finance. Both those committees will have opportunities to work on this bill. Both those committees have the option to hold it longer if need be. I think that there's still a lot of discussion and a lot of information that needs to be gathered. So those are the choices in front of us at this moment, and I will see what the committee would like to do. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Madam Chair, I just had a question for Kyle, just another follow-up. When there's fees assessed for a certain violation or fines assessed, can that funding source be used specifically for a fund? Like, say, for lack of a better term, fix-it fund that actually goes towards supporting situations that we're talking about that are not, I don't think are the culprits, the situation that would be able to help. I don't know. In this case, I don't think that car that you're describing could be modified, Councilor Garcia, but is that possible to direct a certain fine for a certain or specific citation?
Chair Cassett, Councilor Villarreal. I'm not sure on the fine. As it's currently presented, I don't think that I think it would need something else to direct that to go there, but I'm not sure if even if there was that additional language, I'm not sure if that could. I believe for the fees, which I'm considering different from the fine, so the court costs, I believe those are all earmarked for a specific fund, but I'm not sure about the fine.
Can you get back to us about that?
Yes.
I'd like to know. I'd like to know more about what that could look like.
Yeah, on that same point, I think for the classic car, maybe not, but for somebody who maybe has had their catalytic converter stolen, perhaps the Connect funds actually might be something that would be able to be utilized for that. So that would be something else that I'd be interested if that is, I'd be curious information on if that would be something that somebody might be able to use in that scenario. Did you have anything else?
Actually, we have a comment on that.
Hey.
Director.
Hey, Director Ochoa, I did not know that you were here. Welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The Connect Fund can pay for a repair of a car for somebody who meets income requirements. And in Santa Fe County, that's a pretty generous income threshold.
That is wonderful news. Thank you so much. Councilwoman, did you have anything else at this time? Councilor Lee Garcia?
Just an answer to your question, Councilor Villarreal, Councilwoman Villarreal, is that if, let's just say a catalytic converter is stolen, straight pipe it, make the car sound louder. And it'll be different sounding. So again, it's not going to be in the category of what we're really trying to focus on here, which are modified mufflers that make a car specifically loud. And so, but all of these things affect this because at any given, in my opinion, any given time, somebody could, for whatever reason, possibly still be subjective to this rule if we do pass this. And just kind of my thought process on this.
Okay. Do we have a motion? If there's not one, I will make a motion to move this forward to the next committee without recommendation.
A second.
Discussion.
Yes, Counselor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that it is important that we allow our colleagues to chime in on these at the same time. I don't necessarily feel that I am in supportive of this, and I will just say that right away because there's so many different gray areas to it. And I don't know necessarily that we're focusing specifically on the real issue, which is the noise. I know that it comes at different times of the day. But you know, for the sake of others, I don't know that I can support it. I'd like to see it moving along in a sense, but given others the opportunity to chime in and understanding and knowing that it is a big issue in our community. And yet at the same time, I think it kind of isolates and targets a certain group of people in our community, the young people who are car enthusiasts, the people who are classic car enthusiasts. And again, noise is noise. It could be a diesel truck rolling down the road. It could be a garbage truck making noise. And so I think there's a lot of areas other than just mufflers. And I know there are some mufflers out there that are really, really loud. And so that being said, I could support it going without a recommendation, but in the future, I may not support this. And I'm just saying that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions or comments at this time on the motion? And seeing none, can I please get we're going to the mic to vote. Okay, can I please get a roll call?
Counselor Villarreal,
For motion to
Move forward
with
without
that
recommendation.
Yes.
Counselor Chavez,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Kasich.
Yes, and for the record, I will explain my vote. I hand the floor to me to do so. As I mentioned before, just so I want to be very clear, I do think that this is a really complex issue. I think that is an issue that we do need to find some type of solution for. I do not think that the way things are right now, that this is acceptable. I do think that there's a lot more information and research and kind of understanding that needs to go into what our possibilities are, what our potential solutions are. And I do not think that the way that the bill as originally proposed will actually address the issue. And that's one of my biggest challenges with it, that I don't think that the increased fine will actually solve the problem. And so I'm willing to really take time and dig into this to look at what some potential solutions are that I think will be more beneficial and really work. So thank you. With that, let's move on to matters from staff. Any matters from staff today?
Madam Chair, I have no matters from staff.
No matters. Wonderful. Any matters from members of the committee? No. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Wednesday, November 2nd, and at 7:50, we are adjourned.